"You're coming with me," said the virgin billionaire to the poor maid beaten for birthing 3 girls. She was just a servant, bruised, humiliated, and punished for loving her children. He was the richest man in town, known for his cold heart and vow of purity. But when he saw the cruelty she endured, something inside him shattered. In one shocking moment, he ended her torment with 6 words that silenced the whole room. Yet saving her would spark a scandal that could destroy them both. The world calls him a fool, the papers call her a liar, and when she vanishes with her daughters to protect his name, love becomes the only thing he can't buy back. Why would a man who's never touched anyone risk everything for a broken woman the world wants to forget? And when faith is all they have left, will it be enough to save them? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning light hadn't yet touched the horizon when Ellie Hayes quietly pushed herself up from her thin mattress. Her back screamed in protest, each movement a reminder of Mrs. Carter's cruel outburst the night before. But she couldn't let the pain slow her down. The Carters expected breakfast promptly at 7 o'clock, and there were mouths to feed. In the dim light of the servants' quarters, Ellie paused to look at her sleeping daughters. They shared 2 small beds pushed against the wall of their tiny room off the kitchen. Grace and Faith cuddled together in one bed, while little Hope curled up alone in the other, her chest rising and falling with each gentle breath. The sight of them brought tears to Ellie's eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, aching love that made all her suffering worthwhile. She touched her cheek where Mrs. Carter had struck her yesterday. The skin still felt tender, all because she'd been humming a simple lullaby while doing her dusting. "Servants should be silent as shadows," Mrs. Carter had hissed before bringing her hand down hard across Ellie's face. Moving carefully in the pre-dawn quiet, Ellie began gathering ingredients for pancakes, the Carter family's traditional breakfast. Her hands worked automatically, measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs into a bowl. The familiar motions brought a small measure of peace, even as her back throbbed with each reach and bend. The kitchen slowly filled with the warm scent of coffee and pancakes when Mrs. Carter's sharp voice cut through the morning silence. "You're behind schedule." Ellie's shoulders tensed, but she kept her voice soft and steady. "The first batch is nearly ready, Ma'am." Mrs. Carter's heels clicked against the tile as she circled the kitchen island, her critical gaze taking in every detail. "I suppose I shouldn't expect efficiency from someone who wastes her life birthing 3 useless girls." The words struck deeper than any physical blow. Ellie's hands trembled as she flipped a pancake. "My daughters are not—" The slap came fast and hard, snapping Ellie's head to the side. "Don't you dare talk back to me!" Mrs. Carter snarled. "You're nothing but a charity case. Be grateful I give you and those burdens of yours a roof over your heads." Ellie pressed her lips together, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. She focused on the pancake in front of her, watching it bubble and brown, refusing to let Mrs. Carter see her tears. The morning grew more challenging as guests began arriving for the Carter Foundation's quarterly meeting. Ellie caught glimpses of them as she prepared lunch service. Wealthy donors in expensive suits discussing charitable initiatives with practiced smiles. But one guest stood apart from the others. Michael Anders moved through the house like a shadow, his tall frame wrapped in quiet authority. Unlike the other donors who barely acknowledged the staff, his dark eyes seemed to notice everything. When Ellie passed him in the hallway, carrying fresh towels, he stepped aside with a slight nod that made her flush. During lunch, Ellie's trembling hands betrayed her. As she leaned between guests to pour tea, her back seized with pain. The delicate china cup slipped, splashing hot liquid across the pristine tablecloth. "You clumsy fool!" Mrs. Carter's hand whipped out, catching Ellie across the face before anyone could react. The force of the blow sent Ellie stumbling backward, the teapot clattering to the floor. The dining room fell silent. Ellie kept her eyes down, her cheek burning with shame as much as pain. But she could feel Michael Anders's gaze boring into her, could sense the tension radiating from his rigid posture at the table. When she dared a quick glance, she saw his jaw clenched tight, his knuckles white around his water glass. "Clean this mess up immediately," Mrs. Carter commanded, her voice honey-sweet for her guests. "I do apologize for the help's incompetence." The rest of the day passed in a blur of service and silent endurance. When night finally fell and the house grew quiet, Ellie crept back to her daughter's room. They were already asleep, their peaceful faces glowing in the moonlight that filtered through their small window. Ellie knelt beside their beds, ignoring the protest of her battered body. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, touching each small head with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry I'm so weak. Sorry I can't give you better than this." Her voice caught on a sob. "But I promise I'll keep trying. I'll find a way to be stronger for you." Unknown to Ellie, 3 floors above, Michael Anders paced his guest suite. The image of Mrs. Carter striking Ellie played over and over in his mind. His hands clenched into fists as he remembered the resigned acceptance in Ellie's eyes, the way she'd absorbed the abuse as though she believed she deserved it. He stopped at the window, staring out at the manicured grounds bathed in moonlight. The Carter estate represented everything he despised about wealth, the way it could mask cruelty behind a veneer of respectability. His own billions weighed heavily on him sometimes, but tonight they felt like power. Power to make changes, power to protect. Michael's reflection stared back at him from the window glass, his expression hard with fury and determination. He'd seen enough. More than enough. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The night stretched on, with Ellie finally drifting into an uneasy sleep beside her daughters, while above them, Michael Anders continued his restless vigil, his mind working through possibilities and plans. 2 souls, separated by wealth and circumstance, yet connected by the day's events. Both struggling with their own forms of powerlessness and strength, neither aware of how their lives were about to intersect in ways that would change everything. Dawn crept over the horizon like a weary traveler, painting the sky in shades of steel grey that matched Ellie's mood. Her body protested with every movement as she forced herself through her morning routine, each step a reminder of yesterday's abuse. The bruises beneath her long-sleeved uniform throbbed in time with her heartbeat, but she couldn't afford to slow down. In the kitchen, she struggled to lift a heavy pot of coffee, her arms trembling from the effort. The sound of Mrs. Carter's heels clicking against the marble floor sent a shiver down her spine. "For heaven's sake, what is taking so long?" Mrs. Carter's voice cut through the kitchen's morning quiet. "The guests will be down for breakfast any minute. Are you deliberately moving at a snail's pace?" Ellie kept her eyes lowered, focusing on steadying the coffee pot. "No, Mum. I'm sorry, I'll work faster." Mrs. Carter circled her like a hawk studying its prey. "I saw how you looked at Mr. Anders yesterday," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't think I didn't notice your pathetic attempts to gain his sympathy, as if a man like that would give someone like you a second glance." "I wasn't—" Ellie began, but Mrs. Carter's hand shot out, gripping her arm so tight she nearly dropped the pot. "Don't you dare lie to me!" Mrs. Carter hissed. "I know exactly what you're trying to do, playing the victim, hoping he'll rescue you like some fairy tale prince." Her fingers dug deeper into Ellie's arm. "Well, let me remind you of your place." The slap echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Ellie stumbled backward, her hip hitting the counter as she struggled to keep her balance. The coffee pot clattered against the marble countertop, dark liquid splashing across its surface. And then, silence. Michael Anders stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space with an energy that seemed to crackle through the air. His face was a mask of controlled fury, dark eyes fixed on Mrs. Carter with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step back. "Mr. Anders." Mrs. Carter's voice shifted instantly to honeyed sweetness. "I was just dealing with some staff discipline." "Staff discipline?" His voice was quiet but carried the weight of steel. "What I just witnessed was inhuman." Mrs. Carter's smile faltered. "Now, Mr. Anders, you don't understand how these people need to be handled." "These people?" Michael's words cut through her excuse like a blade. "The funding ends today, Mrs. Carter." The color drained from Mrs. Carter's face. "What? But you can't." "I can, and I am." He moved into the kitchen, his steps deliberate. "The Carter Foundation will receive no further support from my organization. Your behavior has made that decision remarkably easy." Mrs. Carter sputtered, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "This is ridiculous. Over a servant? You're making a terrible mistake." Michael ignored her, kneeling beside Ellie, who had pressed herself against the counter, one hand covering her bloodied lip. His eyes softened as they met hers, the fury replaced by gentle concern. "You're coming with me," he said quietly but firmly. Ellie's eyes widened. "But my daughters, we'll get them too," he assured her. "Right now." Mrs. Carter's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, this is Rich, the billionaire white knight, swooping in to save the poor little maid. Do you have any idea how this will look?" Michael helped Ellie to her feet, his touch careful and respectful. "The only thing that matters is how your actions look, Mrs. Carter, and I assure you they look exactly as despicable as they are." The house staff had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. They watched in stunned silence as Michael guided Ellie toward the front door, his hand steady at her elbow. Outside, the sky had opened up, rain falling in heavy sheets that drummed against the mansion's roof. Without hesitation, Michael shrugged off his expensive coat and draped it over Ellie's shoulders. The gesture, so simple yet so telling, drew gasps from the watching staff. He sheltered her with his own body as they made their way to the sleek, black car waiting in the circular drive. "This isn't over," Mrs. Carter called from the doorway, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "You'll regret this." But Michael was focused solely on helping Ellie into the passenger seat, ensuring she was safely inside before closing the door. The rain plastered his white shirt to his shoulders as he walked around to the driver's side, but he seemed completely unconcerned with his own comfort. As the car pulled away from the Carter estate, the staff burst into furious whispers. By afternoon, the story had spread through the serving circles of every wealthy home in town. By evening, it had reached the local coffee shops and grocery stores. And by sundown, everyone in town was talking about how Michael Anders, the mysterious billionaire philanthropist, had stood up to Margaret Carter in her own home, wrapped his coat around her abused maid, and driven away with her in his car. The rain continued to fall, washing away the morning's ugliness, while inside the black car, Ellie sat in stunned silence, wrapped in the warmth of Michael's coat. The gentle purr of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers created a cocoon of safety she hadn't felt in years. She glanced at Michael's profile, his jaw still set with determination, and wondered if she was dreaming. But the ache in her cheek and the weight of his coat around her shoulders told her this was real. This moment, this act of kindness would change everything, and somewhere in her heart, beneath the fear and uncertainty, a tiny spark of hope began to glow. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm, fighting against the relentless coastal rain. Michael Anders guided his car along the winding roads with practiced ease, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of Ellie Hayes cradling her 3 daughters in the back seat, their small bodies curled against her like sleeping kittens. 8-year-old Grace's head rested on her mother's lap, while 6-year-old Faith and 4-year-old Hope were tucked under each arm. The girls had fallen asleep almost immediately after Michael had helped them into the car, exhausted from their hasty departure from the Carter estate. Lightning flashed across the darkening sky, illuminating the worry lines etched across Ellie's face. She hadn't stopped trembling since they left, though Michael wasn't sure if it was from fear or cold. His coat still draped around her shoulders, dwarfing her small frame. "Mr. Anders," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. I don't know how I could ever repay you for this kindness." Michael's eyes met hers in the mirror. "I didn't save you to be repaid," he said softly, his words gentle but firm. The car turned onto a private drive, winding through tall pine trees that swayed in the wind. As they crested a hill, his home came into view, a sprawling oceanfront mansion of glass and stone. Despite its impressive size, something about it felt hollow, like a beautiful shell waiting to be filled with life. Ellie's breath caught as they pulled under the covered entrance. "Oh," she whispered, clutching her daughters closer. "I couldn't possibly—" Before she could finish her protest, the front door opened, spilling warm light onto the wet pavement. Mrs. Donnelly stood in the doorway, her silver hair neat despite the late hour, her face creased with concern as she took in the sight of them. "Michael," she said, hurrying forward with an umbrella. "I've been worried sick since your call. Thank you for waiting up, Mrs. Donnelly." Michael stepped out into the rain, moving quickly to open the back door. "We'll need rooms prepared for Mrs. Hayes and her daughters." "I really can't stay," Ellie protested weakly, even as Michael carefully helped her out of the car. "We'll find somewhere else." "Nonsense," Mrs. Donnelly cut in, her tone brooking no argument. "You'll do no such thing. Not in this weather, and not with those precious little ones." Michael gathered Hope into his arms while Ellie carried Faith. Mrs. Donnelly helped guide a sleepy Grace inside, leading them through a vast entry hall adorned with paintings and sculptures that seemed to glow in the soft lighting. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, their footsteps echoing off marble floors as they climbed the curved staircase to the second floor. Mrs. Donnelly led them to a suite of connecting rooms, already warm and welcoming with beds turned down and fresh flowers on the bedside tables. "I took the liberty of laying out some clean clothes," Mrs. Donnelly said, indicating a stack of folded pajamas. "They might be a bit big, but they'll do for tonight. We can sort out proper things tomorrow." They tucked the girls into bed, their small faces peaceful in sleep. Ellie's hands shook as she brushed hair from their foreheads, tears falling silently down her cheeks. "When was the last time they slept in clean beds?" Michael asked quietly. Ellie wiped her eyes. "Years. We made do with what we had at the Carters." Mrs. Donnelly clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Well, that's done with now. Come along, dear. Let's get you settled too." She led Ellie to an adjoining sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. A plush robe lay across the back of a chair, and a tea service waited on a side table. "Change into something dry," Mrs. Donnelly instructed. "I'll be back to check on you shortly." When she'd gone, Michael retrieved a first aid kit from a cabinet. Ellie emerged from the bathroom wearing the robe, looking small and uncertain in the firelight. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to the chair nearest the fire. When she hesitated, he added, "Please, let me help." She sank into the chair, her shoulders tense. Michael knelt beside her, opening the first aid kit with careful movements. He took out antiseptic and healing ointment, his touch impossibly gentle as he began tending to the bruises on her face. "Why?" Ellie whispered, her eyes searching his. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Michael's hand stilled for a moment. Because I've seen this before," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. In the firelight, his eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Ellie caught a glimpse of old pain there, the kind that never fully heals. They sat in silence as he finished treating her injuries, the rain drumming against the windows and the fire crackling softly. When he was done, Ellie clasped her hands together and bowed her head. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her prayer barely audible, "for sending an angel when we needed one most." Michael moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. He stood there, straight-backed and silent, watching the storm rage outside while different tempests raged within. Memories of another woman, another time, another set, of bruises that no one had been able to heal. Mrs. Donnelly found them like that moments later. Ellie by the fire, prayer still on her lips, and Michael at the window, guardian and haunted soul all at once. She looked between them, understanding in her wise eyes before quietly closing the door and leaving them to their respective vigils. The rain continued to fall, washing away the day's darkness, while inside the mansion, 4 souls slept peacefully for the first time in years, and one stood watch, holding his own demons at bay with newfound purpose. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Michael Anders' mansion, painting golden patterns across the polished breakfast table. The sound of childish giggles filled the usually quiet dining room as Grace, Faith, and Hope sat wide-eyed before plates piled high with fluffy pancakes, fresh strawberries dotting the surface like jewels. "Mama, look!" 4-year-old Hope squealed, her small fingers sticky with syrup. "They're so pretty." Ellie watched her daughters with tears threatening to spill. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen them this happy, this carefree. 6-year-old Faith carefully cut her pancakes into tiny squares, savoring each bite as if afraid it might disappear. 8-year-old Grace, always the protective older sister, kept glancing at their mother, seeking reassurance that this wasn't just a dream. "Mrs. Hayes." Mrs. Donnelly appeared with another plate of pancakes. "You've barely touched your breakfast. You need your strength." Ellie nodded, picking up her fork with trembling fingers. It's been so long since you've been treated like a human being." Mrs. Donnelly's voice was gentle but firm. "Well, get used to it, dear. Things are different now." From the adjoining study, they could hear Michael's voice, deep and controlled, but with an edge of steel as he spoke on the phone. "I want all ties with the Carter Foundation severed immediately. Yes, I understand the implications. No, this isn't negotiable." Ellie's chest tightened. She pushed back her chair, intending to thank him again, to somehow express the depth of her gratitude. But when she approached the study door, she found him withdrawn, his broad shoulders tense as he stared out the window, phone pressed to his ear. "The documentation will be on your desk by noon," he was saying. "Make it happen." He ended the call but didn't turn around. "Mr. Anders," Ellie began softly. "Please." He cut in, still facing the window. "You don't need to thank me again." Mrs. Donnelly appeared at Ellie's elbow, touching her arm gently. "Come help me in the kitchen, dear. Let's give him some space." As they washed dishes together, Mrs. Donnelly's weathered hands moving efficiently through the soap suds, the older woman spoke quietly. "He was 10 years old when we found him." Ellie paused in drying a plate. "Found him?" Mrs. Donnelly nodded, her eyes distant with memory. "Under his bed, trembling like a leaf. His mother." She swallowed hard. She'd been dead for hours, his father's final act of cruelty before disappearing forever. Michael had hidden there, too scared to move, too young to understand that she was gone. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth, the dish towel dropping forgotten to the floor. "Oh, God. Years of abuse, you see." Mrs. Donnelly continued softly. His father was a monster wearing a businessman's suit. His mother endured it all, trying to protect Michael. In the end, she shook her head. Well, in the end, no one protected her. Throughout the day, Ellie watched Michael with new understanding. She saw how he flinched slightly at sudden movements, how he kept his distance while remaining vigilant. She recognized the shadows in his eyes, the same ones she saw in her own mirror. That evening, as she tucked her daughters into their beds, she heard a slight creak at the doorway. Michael stood there, watching as she smoothed Hope's curls and kissed Faith's forehead. His expression had softened, the usual stern lines of his face gentling, as Grace sleepily asked for a bedtime story. "Once upon a time," Ellie began, her voice soft in the dimly lit room, "there was a brave knight who saved people in trouble." She didn't miss how Michael's hands clenched at his sides, or how he lingered until all three girls were sleeping peacefully. But the peace they'd found was shattered the next morning. Michael's assistant burst into his study, tablet in hand, face grim. "Sir, you need to see this." The headline screamed across every major news site. "Billionaire rescue servant, rumors swirl." Photos flooded social media. Michael leading Ellie out of the Carter estate, shielding her with his coat, helping her into his car. The comments beneath were cruel, speculative, dirty. "We need to issue a statement," the assistant insisted. "The press is having a field day. There are implications." "Implications." Michael's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean they're turning basic human decency into scandal?" "Sir, please, just a brief explanation." "I will not explain kindness." Michael cut him off. "If they want to twist this, let them. I won't dignify their gossip with a response." Ellie stood in the doorway, her face pale. "This is all my fault," she whispered. "Just like at the Carters. They said I was trying to seduce Mr. Carter when I was just serving tea. Now they'll say, 'Stop.'" Michael crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Listen to me carefully, Ellie. If the world doesn't understand, that's their burden, not yours. You've done nothing wrong." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, his jaw was tight, his eyes stormy. He could feel it building. The media circus, the speculation, the inevitable storm of public opinion that would try to taint something pure with its own darkness. Mrs. Donnelly appeared, shooing Ellie toward the kitchen where the girls were, waiting for lunch. "Come along, dear. Let the vultures circle. They'll tire themselves out eventually." But in the study, Michael stood before the wall of windows, watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, board members, social connections, all demanding explanations he refused to give. The photos continued to spread online, each new post adding another layer of innuendo to what had been a simple act of mercy. His assistant hovered anxiously. "The board is concerned about the foundation's image. The foundation exists to help people," Michael said firmly. "If they've forgotten that, perhaps it's time for new board members." From the kitchen came the sound of children's laughter, bright and clear and innocent. Michael closed his eyes, letting it wash over him like a balm. He'd recognized something in Ellie's bruised face, in her daughter's careful movements. The same fear he'd lived with as a child. He'd made a choice. Consequences be damned. Now, as the media storm gathered force and social media buzzed with speculation, he stood firm in that choice. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Some things were worth protecting, even at the cost of public opinion. In the kitchen, Ellie held her daughters close, trying to shield them from the growing chaos. But she could feel it too, the gathering storm, the weight of judgment, the price of kindness in a world too cynical to accept it at face value. 2 days passed in tense silence at Michael's oceanfront mansion. The morning fog hung heavy over the grounds when an urgent knock echoed through the halls. Ellie, who had been helping Hope with her breakfast, froze at the sound. Her fingers trembled as she wiped them on her apron. Mrs. Donnelly hurried to answer the door, but Ellie followed close behind. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw 2 police officers standing on the doorstep, their badges glinting in the weak sunlight. "Eleanor Hayes?" the taller officer asked, his expression stern. "Yes?" Ellie's voice came out barely above a whisper. "We have a warrant for your arrest." He held out an official-looking document. "Mrs. Margaret Carter has filed charges against you for theft and—" He paused, checking the paper. "Moral turpitude." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ellie's feet. Behind her she heard Michael's quick footsteps approaching. "What's the meaning of this?" His voice was sharp but controlled. The second officer explained. "Mrs. Carter claims Ms. Hayes stole money from the household and—" He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Used seduction to escape disciplinary action for her crimes." Michael's face darkened with fury, but his voice remained steady. "Contact my legal team immediately," he instructed Mrs. Donnelly, who was already reaching for the phone. Outside, car doors slammed as news vans began pulling up to the gates. Reporters spilled out, cameras flashing, microphones ready. The story had broken, and like sharks scenting blood, they'd come to feast on the scandal. "My client will not be going anywhere," Michael's lawyer declared, arriving within minutes. "These charges are baseless and clearly retaliatory." For the next hour, the mansion became a circus. More reporters arrived, shouting questions through the gates. Police radios crackled. Michael's legal team huddled in his study, making calls and reviewing documents. Ellie sat in the kitchen. Her daughters clustered around her like frightened birds. "Mummy, are the police going to take you away?" Grace asked, her 8-year-old face pinched with worry. "No, sweetheart," Ellie promised, though her own heart raced with uncertainty. "Everything will be okay." Michael appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face set with determination. "Ellie, I need to make a statement to the press. Will you trust me?" She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The cameras were waiting when Michael stepped outside, Ellie trembling beside him. The questions came like arrows. "Mr. Anders, did you help Ms. Hayes escape legal consequences? Is there truth to the allegations of theft? What is the nature of your relationship with your former maid?" Michael raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "She's innocent," he declared, his voice carrying across the lawn. "And under my protection. These charges are nothing more than the desperate actions of someone whose cruelty has been exposed." Inside, Ellie watched the scene unfold on the television in Michael's study. Her hands shook as she saw herself in the background of the shots, looking small and scared behind Michael's protective stance. When he returned inside, she broke down completely. "I can't do this to you," she sobbed. "Your reputation, your work, I'm causing you so much trouble. I should just go, face the charges myself." "No." Michael crossed the room and took her hands in his. They were warm and steady against her cold, trembling fingers. "If they won't let you stand alone, then stand beside me." She looked up at him through tears, confused. "Marry me," he said quietly. "Legally. Today. It will protect you and the girls from custody battles and these defamation attempts. Mrs. Carter won't be able to touch you." Ellie stared at him, stunned. "What?" "It's the surest way to keep you and your daughters safe," he explained. "My lawyers agree. The marriage would give you legal protection that nothing else can match." "But why would you do this? Take on 3 children, a woman you barely know?" "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because you deserve peace." Ellie shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't even believe in miracles anymore." Michael's eyes softened. Then let me believe for both of us. The next few hours passed in a blur. Michael's lawyer drew up the paperwork, while Mrs. Donnelly helped Ellie change into a simple blue dress she found in one of the guest room closets. The girls watched wide-eyed as their mother pinned up her hair with shaking fingers. As evening settled over the mansion, they gathered in Michael's study. The lawyer served as witness, Mrs. Donnelly held the girls close, and Michael and Ellie signed their names on the marriage certificate. The scratch of pen on paper seemed deafening in the quiet room. Ellie's hand trembled as she wrote her signature. She was terrified of the future, of failing, of this man who had become her unlikely savior. Beside her, Michael's own hand shook slightly as he signed, though for different reasons. He was breaking his long-held vow of solitude, stepping into a role he never thought he'd take. When the lawyer left, carrying the filed paperwork, the mansion grew silent again. The girls had fallen asleep on the sofa in the study, Hope's thumb in her mouth, Faith curled against Grace's side. Ellie stood by the window, watching the last reporters pack up their equipment and drive away. Michael stepped up beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Neither spoke for a long moment, but in the quiet, something had shifted. The emptiness that had haunted them both, her in her years of abuse, him in his self-imposed isolation, felt less absolute. They weren't alone anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, painting golden patterns across the marble floors. The morning after their quiet marriage ceremony felt different somehow, lighter, as if the weight of uncertainty had lifted just a little. Ellie found herself in the kitchen earlier than usual, her hands moving automatically to prepare breakfast. Old habits died hard. The sound of small feet pattering down the hallway made her smile. "Mommy!" Faith burst into the kitchen, her 6-year-old energy filling the room. "Mr. Michael has a piano, a real one." "Faith," Ellie started gently. "We shouldn't touch. It's quite all right." Michael's voice came from the doorway. He stood there in a crisp white shirt, his tie not yet knotted. "The piano is for everyone in this house." Faith bounced on her toes. "Can we really play it, Mr. Michael?" "Just Michael," he said softly, kneeling to her level. "And yes, you can play it whenever you like." Grace and Hope appeared behind him, their eyes wide with wonder. "Really?" Grace asked, clearly trying to contain her excitement. Michael nodded. "In fact," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something for all of you." He pulled out 3 small envelopes. The girls gathered around as he handed them each one. Inside were gift cards to the local school supply store. "I thought you might like to pick out your own things for school," he explained. Hope, at 4 years old, didn't quite understand the gift card concept, but she clutched it preciously. "Thank you," she whispered, showing a rare moment of boldness by hugging his leg. Michael froze for a moment, then gently patted her head. Ellie watched the interaction, her heart twisting with emotion. "The piano arrives this afternoon," Michael continued, standing up. "Music." He paused, his eyes distant. "Music heals things words can't." Throughout the morning, Ellie insisted on maintaining her usual routine, cleaning, organizing, preparing meals. When Michael found her dusting the library shelves, he frowned. "Ellie, you don't need to do this anymore. You're not a servant here." She kept dusting. "I need to earn my keep, Michael. I won't be a burden." He stepped closer, gently taking the duster from her hands. "You're not a burden. You're my wife, legally and in the eyes of everyone who matters. Please, let yourself rest." Their eyes met, and Ellie saw the sincerity in his gaze. Slowly, she nodded. That morning began a new routine. Instead of serving breakfast, Ellie found herself sitting at the table with Michael and the girls. They shared fresh fruit, warm bread, and conversations that started hesitantly but grew more comfortable with each passing day. "Did you have a favorite book when you were little?" Faith asked one morning, spooning cereal into her mouth. Michael paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Yes," he said after a moment. "The Velveteen Rabbit. My mother." He swallowed hard. "She used to read it to me." Ellie reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. He didn't pull away. The piano's arrival transformed the parlor. It was a beautiful instrument, gleaming black and perfectly tuned. The girls approached it with reverence, their small fingers ghosting over the keys. "I can teach you some basics," Michael offered, surprising everyone. He sat at the bench, his fingers finding the keys with practiced ease. A simple melody filled the room, sweet and sad. "Where did you learn?" Ellie asked softly. "My mother insisted on lessons, said music was God's way of speaking when words failed." His fingers stilled on the keys. "I stopped playing after she died." The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Ellie found herself laughing more, the sound echoing through halls that had known too much silence. The girls bloomed under Michael's quiet attention, especially Faith, who took to following him around asking endless questions that he answered with infinite patience. When Michael mentioned his upcoming charity event at the church shelter, Ellie surprised him by asking to come along. "Are you sure?" he asked. "There will be press there." "I want to help," she said firmly. "I can't hide forever." The shelter was a place of both hardship and hope. Women and children filled its rooms, each with stories that echoed Ellie's own. She moved among them with natural grace, offering comfort, listening to their stories, holding hands that trembled like hers once had. Michael watched from across the room as she sat with a young mother, gently bouncing her baby while the woman ate her first proper meal in days. Something in his chest loosened, a warmth he hadn't felt in years spreading through him. When their eyes met across the room, he smiled, really smiled, and Ellie caught her breath at the transformation in his face. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Ellie found Michael in his study. He sat in his usual chair, but something about his posture seemed different, more relaxed, more present. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked up. "For what?" "For giving me back my dignity, for showing my girls what kindness looks like, for everything." Michael stood slowly, moving to stand before her. "No, Ellie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You restored mine. I'd forgotten what it meant to truly help someone, to let people in. I've been hiding behind my wealth and my principles for so long." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the evening light painting shadows on the walls. Finally, Ellie wished him good night and turned toward her room. Michael followed, keeping a respectful distance. At her door, she turned to find him, watching her, with an unreadable expression. He seemed to want to say something more, but instead he bowed his head slightly. "Lord," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "thank you for second chances." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Ellie watched him go, feeling something shift in her heart, something that felt remarkably like hope. The late September morning dawned bright and crisp as Michael watched the three girls climb into his car, backpacks almost as big as they were. Mrs. Donnelly had helped Ellie pick out new school clothes for them, simple but pretty dresses that made the girls beam with pride. "Remember what we practiced?" Ellie knelt before Hope, straightening her tiny collar. "Yes, Mama. My new last name is Anders now," the 4-year-old recited carefully. Michael's heart tightened at the words. Though the marriage was meant for protection, hearing his name attached to these precious children stirred something deep within him. The prestigious Brighton Academy welcomed them warmly, though Michael noticed some parents whispering behind their hands. He stepped closer to Ellie, his presence a shield against their judgment. "They'll be safe here," he assured her as they watched the girls disappear into their classrooms. "The headmistress knows their situation." Ellie nodded, wiping away a tear. "I never thought they'd have this chance." Back at the mansion, Ellie found her place alongside Mrs. Donnelly, learning the rhythms of managing such a large household. The elderly housekeeper showed her the careful systems she'd developed over decades, teaching her everything from wine cellaring to managing the cleaning staff. "You have a gift for this," Mrs. Donnelly observed one afternoon, watching Ellie organize the week's menu. "You see what needs doing before anyone asks?" Ellie smiled, remembering years of anticipating others' needs to avoid punishment. "I suppose some skills can be repurposed for good." It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Ellie noticed Thomas, the elderly gardener, sitting alone on a bench in the rose garden. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Without hesitation, she went to him, carrying a cup of tea and sitting beside him in silence until he was ready to speak. "My Margaret," he finally whispered. "The doctors say the cancer's spread." Michael, walking the grounds after a conference call, stopped short at the sight before him. Ellie held the old man's weathered hands in hers, her head bowed in prayer with him. Her voice carried softly on the breeze. "Lord, we lift up Margaret to you. Give her strength, give Thomas courage, and remind them both that love is stronger than any darkness." The simple grace of her prayer, the genuine compassion in her touch, it pierced something in Michael's carefully constructed walls. He watched as she helped Thomas to his feet, promising to visit Margaret in the hospital. That evening, seeking quiet after the girls were asleep, Ellie found herself drawn to light spilling from Michael's study. She paused in the doorway, surprised to find him bent over a sketch pad, charcoal moving in swift, sure strokes. He looked up, caught, then gestured for her to enter. "I don't usually let anyone see these." Ellie moved closer, gasping softly at the scene taking shape on the paper. Waves crashed against rocky cliffs, storm clouds gathering overhead. The ocean seemed alive with motion and emotion. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I didn't know you were an artist." Michael set down his charcoal, rubbing his thumb across a smudge. "My mother taught me. She said art was a way to speak the unspeakable." Something in his voice made Ellie reach for the kettle he kept in his study. She prepared tea the way she'd learned he liked it. Strong, with just a touch of honey. "Tell me about her?" she asked softly, setting his cup beside him. Michael stared into the amber liquid, his fingers tracing the cup's rim. "She was luminous. Even when my father's cruelty dimmed her light, she found ways to shine. She'd paint with me in secret, sing when he was away." His voice cracked. "The day she died, I found her last painting hidden under her bed. It was of 2 birds flying free." Ellie's heart ached at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached across the desk and took his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "Then maybe God sent you to break that chain," she whispered, feeling him stiffen at her touch, then slowly relax. "You're not your father, Michael. You're the man who stops the hurting." Tears gathered in his eyes but didn't fall. They sat in understanding silence until the tea grew cold. That night, for the first time in decades, Michael dreamed of his mother. Not as he usually saw her, bruised and afraid, but smiling, her hands covered in paint, teaching him to mix colors. He woke with tears on his pillow but peace in his heart. The next morning, he heard it. the same sweet lullaby that had earned Ellie a beating in the Carter house. She was folding laundry in the sunroom, her voice soft but clear. "Hush now, my darling. Be still and rest. Angels are coming to give you sweet dreams." Instead of flinching at the memory of that cruel day, Michael found himself drawn to the melody. Without conscious thought, he joined in, his deep voice harmonizing with her lighter one. Ellie turned, startled but not stopping. Together they finished the verse, their voices weaving together like threads of gold and silver. When the song ended, neither spoke. Something had shifted, like a key turning in a long locked door. That evening they stood on the balcony watching the sun sink into the ocean. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of Mrs. Donnelly's roses and sea salt. Below them, the girls played in the garden, their laughter floating up like bubbles. "I never thought I'd hear them laugh like that again," Ellie said softly. Michael turned to look at her, seeing how the sunset painted her face in soft gold. Something was growing between them, as gentle as morning light, as natural as breathing. It was too pure, too precious to name. This feeling that made his chest ache with both joy and fear. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, each lost in thoughts of healing, hope, and the mysterious ways that God mends broken things. The ocean whispered below, constant and eternal, while in the garden 3 little girls chased fireflies, their giggles echoing through the gathering dusk. The morning paper arrived like a slap. Ellie's hands trembled as she read the headline, "Billionaire's Marriage of Convenience, Sources Reveal Truth Behind Anders's Sudden Wedding." Below it, grainy photos showed Michael entering his office building, his face stern and distant. The article was filled with anonymous sources claiming their marriage was a calculated move to protect his reputation. Ellie quickly folded the paper, trying to hide it beneath a stack of mail, but Michael's quiet voice made her jump. "You don't need to protect me from them." He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still in his running clothes, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "I saw the online version at 5 this morning." "I'm so sorry," Ellie whispered, her cheeks burning. "This is all my fault." Michael crossed the room, his expression gentle but firm. "Let them talk, Ellie. Truth doesn't need defending." But she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. He was angry, not at her, but at the invasion of their privacy, the cruel speculation that turned kindness into scandal. The morning proceeded as usual. Breakfast with the girls, homework checks, kisses goodbye. But when Michael left for a board meeting, Ellie noticed his shoulders were rigid with contained fury. Later that afternoon, Grace came home early from school, her small face tear-stained. Ellie found her curled up in the window seat of the library, clutching her favorite Bible. "Sweetheart, what happened?" Ellie sat beside her daughter, gathering her close. "Jenny Marshall said..." Grace hiccuped. "She said Mr. Michael isn't our real daddy, that he only married you because he felt sorry for us. She said we're just charity cases." Ellie's heart cracked. She held Grace tighter, stroking her hair. "Oh, my sweet girl." That evening, after the younger girls were asleep, Ellie told Michael about the incident. He was in his study, reviewing documents, but he set them aside immediately when he saw her expression. "I think..." Ellie twisted her hands together. "I think we should homeschool them, just for a while, until things settle down." Michael nodded slowly. "I can hire the best tutors. We'll turn the library into a classroom." And so they did. The grand library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and ocean views, became a place of learning and laughter. Michael hired Ms. Peterson, a kind-faced teacher with 20 years of experience, but he often joined their lessons when he worked from home. The girls blossomed in the peaceful environment. Faith discovered a passion for science, conducting simple experiments at the kitchen table. Hope's artistic talents emerged as she covered pages with colorful drawings, and Grace, always thoughtful, dove deep into literature, reading far above her grade level. One stormy evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled overhead, the power went out with a sudden snap. The house plunged into darkness, filled with the girls' excited squeals. "Don't worry." Michael's voice came from somewhere near the study. Flashlight beams danced across the walls as he and Mrs. Donnelly distributed candles and matches. "Who wants to play a game?" Ellie suggested, trying to keep the younger ones calm. Michael disappeared briefly and returned with an armload of board games. They settled in the library, where the fireplace provided extra light and warmth. Candlelight flickered across their faces as they played Monopoly, Sorry, and Scrabble. "That's not a real word." Faith giggled as Michael laid down his tiles. "Quixotic is absolutely a word," he defended, trying to keep a straight face. "It means unrealistically idealistic." "Like you?" Ellie teased, surprising herself with her boldness. Michael's eyes met hers across the board, something warm and tender in his gaze. "Perhaps." Hours passed in a blur of laughter and friendly competition. Hope fell asleep first, curled up on the Persian rug with her head on Michael's knee. Faith followed soon after, using a couch pillow as a bed. Grace lasted the longest, but eventually dozed off mid-sentence while reading by candlelight. In the warm glow, with their sleeping daughters around them, Ellie felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "I can't remember the last time I laughed like this," she admitted softly. Michael watched her for a long moment, his face half in shadow. "I never believed I'd feel home again," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. The candlelight danced across his features, softening them. Ellie found herself leaning forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. But Michael suddenly stood, careful not to disturb Hope. "We should get them to bed," he said, his voice strained. She saw him take a deliberate step back, remembered the vow of purity Mrs. Donnelly had mentioned. The air grew thick with unspoken words and careful distance. They carried the girls to their rooms in silence, tucking them in with gentle hands and whispered good nights. But sleep proved elusive for both adults. Ellie lay in her bed, listening to the storm rage outside, replaying the moment in the library. She touched her lips, remembering how close she'd come to crossing that invisible line between them. In his room down the hall, Michael stood at the window, watching lightning split the sky. His reflection showed a man at war with himself. Duty against desire, past against present, fear against hope. The storm raged on, matching the turbulence in their hearts, as both lay awake in their separate rooms, each wondering if the other was also watching the ceiling, counting the hours until dawn. The candlelight had revealed too much, made them forget their careful boundaries. Now, in the darkness, those boundaries felt both essential and unbearable. Thunder rolled again, like God's own commentary on their situation. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight, but sleep remained a distant dream for both. Morning light streamed through the study windows as Michael reviewed quarterly reports. His phone buzzed. Richard Coleman, his foundation's lead investor, calling at 7:30 in the morning. That was never good news. "Michael, we need to talk." Richard's voice crackled through the speaker. "The board is concerned." Michael's jaw tightened. "About?" "The situation with your marriage. The tabloids are having a field day. 3 major donors have already threatened to pull out. They're worried about association with scandal." "There is no scandal," Michael said firmly. "I helped someone in need. That's exactly what our foundation stands for." "It's not that simple." Richard sighed. The optics are terrible. A billionaire suddenly marrying his maid. The gossip sites are claiming she manipulated you, that it's all a scheme. That's absurd. Maybe so, but perception matters. The foundation's work, helping abuse victims, funding shelters, it all requires public trust. Your personal life is affecting that trust. Michael's knuckles whitened around the phone. What exactly are you suggesting? Distance yourself. Make it clear this was a temporary arrangement. The board believes if you separate from her now, we can spin it as a charitable act that's run its course. Absolutely not. Michael's voice turned to ice. Michael, be reasonable. Everything you've built is worth nothing if I abandon my principles. Michael stood, pacing. I won't discard someone to appease gossip. The foundation can survive without fair-weather donors. Unknown to Michael, Ellie had approached his study with fresh coffee. She froze outside the door, the cup trembling in her hands as she heard his conversation. Your legacy is at stake. Richard pressed. Years of work, millions helped, all at risk because of one woman and her children. Ellie's heart shattered. She set the coffee down silently and backed away, tears blurring her vision. All the good Michael had done, all the lives he'd touched, and she was threatening to destroy it all. Throughout dinner that evening, Ellie forced smiles and cheerful conversation, serving Michael's favorite pasta dish. She made sure the girls were especially well behaved, their homework complete, their manners perfect. But Michael noticed. He saw how her smile didn't reach her eyes, how her hands shook slightly as she passed the bread. When Faith asked to be excused, Ellie's voice wavered just slightly on, Yes, sweetheart. After the girls went to bed, Ellie sat at the antique writing desk in her room. Tears fell onto the cream-colored stationery as she wrote, Dearest Michael, your kindness saved us when we had nothing. You gave my daughters hope, safety, and joy they'd never known. But I cannot be the reason your life's work crumbles. The foundation helps so many. Women like me, children like my girls. That matters more than our comfort. You showed me what real goodness looks like. I pray someday I can pay that forward. Please forgive me for leaving this way. Sometimes love means protecting others from harm, even when it breaks your own heart. With deepest gratitude and care, Ellie. She sealed the envelope with shaking hands and crept to his study, placing it carefully on his desk. Then she packed quickly and quietly. Just essentials, leaving behind all the beautiful things he'd bought them. Those weren't really theirs to keep. At 4:15 in the morning, Ellie gently woke her daughters. We have to go, my loves, she whispered, helping them into warm coats. But why? Grace asked, rubbing her eyes. Where's Michael? Ellie's heart clenched. Sometimes love means letting go before you cause harm, she explained softly, though the words felt like glass in her throat. They slipped out just before dawn, while the house was still dark and quiet. Ellie knew Pastor Ruth would take them in. She'd helped so many women start over. The shelter wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Hope cried silently in the taxi, and Ellie held her close. Faith stared out the window at the mansion growing smaller behind them. Grace just looked at her mother with old, knowing eyes that made Ellie's heart break all over again. When Michael woke at his usual 6 o'clock, the house felt wrong, too quiet. No sounds of breakfast preparation, no giggles from the girls' rooms. His heart started pounding before his mind even processed why. He found her letter on his desk, and his hands trembled so badly he could barely open it. As he read, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. The letter fell from his fingers as he dropped to his knees beside his desk. God, please! His voice broke on a sob, the first tears he'd shed since his mother's funeral. Please bring them home safe. He pressed his forehead against the cool wood of his desk, shoulders shaking. I can't lose another family, he whispered, not again. Please." The morning sun painted golden stripes across his bowed form as he prayed, while across town, Ellie tucked her exhausted daughters into narrow shelter beds, her own prayers a mirror of his. "God, please let this be right. Please let him understand. Please keep his heart safe from the harm we might have caused." The day dawned bright and clear, but for both of them, it felt darker than any storm. The mansion felt like a tomb. Each footstep echoed through empty halls where children's laughter once rang. Michael walked aimlessly, touching the piano keys that now gathered dust, pausing at the girls' bedroom doors left slightly ajar, just as they'd left them. Mrs. Donnelly watched him with growing concern. His suits hung looser each day, his face gaunt from sleepless nights and untouched meals. She left plates outside his study door, only to find them cold and untouched hours later. "Mr. Anders," she pleaded one morning, finding him staring at Faith's forgotten teddy bear. "You need to eat something." He merely shook his head, his voice hollow. "I keep thinking I hear them. Little footsteps. Hope's giggle. But it's just..." Silence. At Pastor Ruth's shelter across town, Ellie threw herself into work, trying to outrun her heartache. She rose before dawn to help in the kitchen, cooking breakfast for dozens of women and children. Her hands stayed busy, but her mind wandered back to quiet mornings sharing coffee with Michael, watching sunrise paint the ocean gold through his study windows. The girls struggled to adjust. Grace grew quiet, her usual brightness dimmed. Faith stopped telling her silly jokes. But Hope, sweet, fragile Hope, seemed to fade the most. She missed her special cushion on Michael's piano bench, where she'd sit for hours watching him work. "Mama," Hope whispered one night, her small face flushed. "When can we go home?" Ellie's heart cracked. "This is home now, sweetheart. We're safe here." But safety felt cold compared to the warmth they'd left behind. 10 days after leaving the mansion, Hope didn't come down for breakfast. Ellie found her curled up in bed, burning with fever. "She's so hot," Ellie told Pastor Ruth, panic rising in her throat. "And her breathing sounds wrong." They rushed Hope to St. Mary's Hospital. The emergency room lights were harsh and unforgiving as doctors examined her, ordering test after test. Grace and Faith huddled together in plastic waiting room chairs while Ellie paced, praying without cease. The doctor's words hit like physical blows. Congenital heart defect. Required. Surgery. Significant risk. "How much?" Ellie whispered, thinking of her meager savings. "Don't worry about that now," Pastor Ruth said firmly. "Let's focus on Hope." Ellie sat beside Hope's hospital bed that evening, watching her daughter's labored breathing. The machines beeped steadily, monitoring her struggling heart. Faith and Grace had finally fallen asleep in chairs nearby, exhausted from worry. "Lord," Ellie prayed, her forehead pressed against Hope's small hand. "I've tried so hard to do what's right. I left to protect Michael's work, his purpose. I didn't want to be selfish." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Please don't take her. Please don't let my choice cost her life." Pastor Ruth stood in the doorway, watching Ellie's shoulders shake with silent sobs. She'd seen countless women struggle and suffer, but something about Ellie's quiet strength in the face of impossible choices moved her deeply. Making a decision, she stepped into the hallway and pulled out her phone. Michael answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "Yes?" "It's Pastor Ruth Collins," she said softly. "I know we've never met, but I need you to listen carefully." She heard his sharp intake of breath at the mention of her name. He knew who she was, knew she ran the shelter where Ellie had gone. "Is she... are they..." His voice cracked. "They need you," Pastor Ruth said. "But first, you need to understand something. Ellie didn't leave because she stopped loving you. She left because she thought she was saving you." Silence stretched across the line. Then, barely audible, "Saving me from what? From losing everything you've built, your foundation, your work helping others." She heard about the donors threatening to pull out. She couldn't bear to be the reason it all fell apart. A sound like a wounded animal escaped him. "She left to protect me? She loves you enough to break her own heart rather than damage your life's purpose." Pastor Ruth's voice gentled. "But right now, Hope is in the hospital. She needs surgery, and Ellie needs strength she's running out of." "Where?" The word came out like a prayer. "St. Mary's Hospital, 4th floor, pediatric wing." The line went dead. Pastor Ruth smiled slightly, knowing he was already moving. Michael drove through thick fog, his headlights cutting white paths through the darkness. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles showed white, but his mind was crystal clear for the first time in days. He'd thought they'd left because he wasn't enough, because his damaged heart couldn't offer what they needed. But they'd left because Ellie thought she wasn't worthy of costing him anything. The realization burned like holy fire in his chest. They'd both been so careful of each other's hearts, they'd forgotten how to simply let love heal them. The fog parted before his car like divine purpose leading him forward, each mile bringing him closer to the family he'd thought lost. This time, he wouldn't let fear, or pride, or misguided protection stand in their way. He pressed the accelerator harder, racing towards the hospital lights glowing in the distance like a beacon calling him home. Dawn painted the hospital windows in soft rose and gold. Michael had spent the night in a chair beside Hope's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with each precious breath. Ellie had finally dozed off in the corner, Grace and Faith curled up against her like puppies seeking warmth. The peaceful moment shattered when Mrs. Donnelly called. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "the press is everywhere. Someone spotted your car in the hospital parking lot. They're gathering outside." Michael moved to the window. Sure enough, a small crowd of reporters huddled near the entrance, cameras ready. Their presence felt like vultures circling, waiting to turn this private pain into public spectacle. He looked back at Ellie and the girls. For too long, they'd lived in shadows, trying to hide from judgment. Something inside him shifted, hardened into resolve. "Let them come," he said quietly. He straightened his tie and walked down to the hospital entrance. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and camera flashes erupted like lightning. "Mr. Anders, is it true you're here with your alleged wife? Are the rumors about the Maid true? What about the accusations from the Carter family?" The questions came rapid fire, overlapping each other in their urgency. Michael raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "I'm here with my wife and our daughters." The word "our" felt right on his tongue, natural as breathing. "And yes, when I met her, she was working as a maid for the Carters." More flashes, more shouted questions. But Michael wasn't finished. "You want to know why I took in a poor maid and her 3 daughters? Why I married her?" His voice grew stronger, filled with quiet passion. "Because love is not a scandal. It's salvation." The reporters grew still, sensing a story deeper than their usual fare. 25 years ago, another woman lived in fear of judgment. She cleaned houses, raised her son alone, endured abuse because she thought she deserved no better. Michael's voice cracked slightly. "That woman was my mother." Camera flashes slowed, notebooks lowered. In the growing silence, Michael continued. "She died when I was 10 years old, beaten to death by a man who thought his wealth gave him the right to destroy her." He took a deep breath. "I found her body. I hid under my bed until police came, and I promised myself that if I ever saw that kind of cruelty again, I wouldn't look away. A female reporter in the front wiped her eyes discreetly. When I saw Ellie Hayes being struck, being humiliated, I saw my mother. When I heard her daughters crying, I heard myself as a child. Michael's eyes blazed with conviction. So yes, I took them in. Yes, I married her. Not for scandal, not for attention, but because sometimes love means standing between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. Up on the 4th floor, Ellie stood in the hallway window, watching. Tears streamed down her face as Michael's words carried through the hospital's sound system. Pastor Ruth stood beside her, squeezing her hand. "He's breaking every wall," Pastor Ruth whispered. "For you." Below, Michael continued. "You want headlines? Here's your headline. Local billionaire remembers his mother by protecting another mother. Man with wealth chooses to use it, defending the defenseless. Love wins over cruelty." His voice softened. That's the only story that matters. The crowd had transformed. Where there had been hungry sensationalism, now there was something like respect. Several reporters were openly crying. "Mr. Anders," one called out gently, "what would you say to others in similar situations?" "I'd say that love is not weakness, kindness is not naive, and helping others is never a mistake." He looked directly into the cameras. "To anyone suffering in silence, you deserve better. To anyone with the power to help, use it, because in the end, we're all just broken people trying to heal each other." The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media exploded with support. Love Not Scandal started trending. The shelter's donation page crashed from too much traffic as people rushed to contribute. By afternoon, the hospital administrator visited Hope's room. "We've been moved by your story," she told Ellie. "The hospital board has voted to cover 60% of Hope's surgery costs." Ellie could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The day passed in a blur of medical preparations and quiet conversations. Hope was scheduled for surgery early the next morning. As evening fell, Ellie found herself drawn to the hospital chapel. The small room was empty, lit only by flickering candles. She knelt in the front pew, hands clasped tight. "Thank you," she prayed, "for showing me that sometimes running away isn't the answer, that sometimes staying and fighting is the braver choice." Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air itself seemed to change when Michael entered a room. "I didn't mean to leave forever," she whispered, still facing forward. Michael moved slowly, deliberately, until he stood beside her pew. "I never stopped waiting." His voice was rough with emotion, and something in its rawness gave her courage to look up at him. His eyes held the same warmth she remembered, the same quiet strength that had first made her feel safe. "I thought I was protecting you," she said softly. "Your work, your reputation, it means so much to so many people. I couldn't bear to be the reason it fell apart." Michael knelt beside her pew, bringing them eye to eye. "Ellie," he whispered, "don't you understand? Without you and the girls, none of it means anything. You taught me that love isn't just about protection. It's about presence, about staying, even when it's hard. Especially then." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "You and the girls, you brought music back into my house. Laughter, light. For the first time since my mother died, I felt like I was living, not just existing." Ellie's fingers tightened around his. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of needing you, of letting myself believe in something good." "I know." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I've been scared too, scared of not being enough, of somehow tainting you with my broken parts. You're not broken, she whispered fiercely. You're healing. We all are. The chapel's candles flickered, casting warm shadows across their joined hands. Outside, the hospital hummed with its usual nighttime activity, but in here, time seemed to pause, giving them space to find their way back to each other. Tomorrow morning, Michael said softly. Hope goes into surgery, and I want to be there, not as your protector or savior, but as your partner, as someone who loves all of you, who chooses you every day. Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks. Even with all the gossip, the judgment? Let them talk. He smiled gently. We know the truth. Love isn't a scandal, it's a miracle, and I'm done being afraid of miracles. They sat together in the quiet chapel, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this sacred space, they had found their way home to each other. The first rays of dawn painted the hospital walls in soft amber light. In the surgical waiting room, Ellie sat rigid, her hand gripping Michael's so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The distant sound of medical equipment hummed through the corridors like an anxious heartbeat. 4 hours, she whispered, glancing at the wall clock for the 100th time. They said it could take up to 6. Michael's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, a steady rhythm that matched his breathing. She's strong, Ellie. Stronger than anyone knows. Grace and Faith had fallen asleep on the chairs across from them, exhausted from the early wake-up. Mrs. Donnelly sat nearby, keeping watch over them with motherly concern. As the morning light grew stronger, memories washed over Ellie like waves. She remembered the first time she'd noticed Hope's breathing wasn't right, how the little girl would get winded just climbing stairs. But at the Carter estate, medical care had been a luxury she couldn't afford. The guilt of that knowledge pressed against her chest. I should have known sooner, she whispered. Should have found a way to get her checked. Michael shifted closer, his voice low and gentle. You did everything you could with what you had. That's all anyone can do. A nurse walked past, and Ellie tensed, but it wasn't for them. The waiting continued. Tell me something, she said suddenly, desperate for distraction. Something from before, from when you were young. Michael was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. I used to make up stories, he finally said. Every night, after things got bad, I'd lie in bed and pretend the day had ended differently. Ellie turned to face him, seeing the shadows of old pain in his eyes. What kind of stories? Simple ones. I'd imagine my mother cooking dinner, laughing at something I'd said. My father coming home sober, asking about my day at school. Normal things that never happened. He smiled sadly. But the best part was always the ending. In my stories, every night ended in peace. Even when it didn't. Ellie whispered. Especially then. He squeezed her hand. Those stories kept me sane, kept me believing that somewhere, somehow, good things were possible. Another hour passed. Ellie's mind drifted to darker places. The sound of Mrs. Carter's sharp voice, the sting of her hand, the constant fear. But now, those memories felt distant, like watching scenes from someone else's life. I used to pray every night, she confessed. Not for rescue, I'd given up on that, just for strength to keep going, to keep my girls safe. She looked at Michael through tears. I never imagined God would send someone like you. Michael's eyes glistened. Maybe that's why he did, because you weren't asking for yourself. The surgical wing doors opened, and both of them jumped. But it was another family's doctor, bringing different news to different anxious faces. Tell me more, Ellie pleaded. How did you survive? Michael's voice grew softer, meant only for her. Books helped. I'd hide in the library after school, read about people who overcame impossible things. But mostly it was small acts of kindness. The librarian who always saved me the new adventure novels. The lunch lady who slipped extra food in my bag. They probably never knew what it meant to me. Is that why you started the foundation? Partly. He shifted in his chair. I wanted to create safe spaces for people who needed them. But I think I was also trying to prove something. That damaged people could still do good things. You're not damaged, Ellie said fiercely. You're beautiful. The words hung between them, honest and raw. Michael's breath caught, and for a moment the whole world seemed to pause. Then the doors opened again, and this time their surgeon walked through. His face was tired but kind, his surgical cap still on his head. She's going to be okay. The words took a moment to register. Ellie felt her knees give way as relief flooded through her. Michael caught her as she collapsed, holding her close as sobs shook her body. The repair went perfectly. The surgeon continued. Her heart is strong. She's in recovery now. Michael's arms tightened around Ellie as she cried, his own tears falling silently into her hair. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Now you believe in miracles? He whispered. Ellie looked up at him, her face shining with tears and joy. I believe in the God who sent you. Later they sat beside Hope's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The breathing tube had been removed, and for the first time in years her sleep was truly peaceful. Grace and Faith had crawled onto the bed with their sister, careful of the tubes and wires. Michael watched Ellie watching her daughters, saw the way peace had settled over her like a blessing. Something had shifted between them, something profound and permanent. It wasn't just the crisis they'd weathered together, or the prayers they'd shared. It was the recognition that their broken pieces fit together perfectly, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either had imagined possible. The morning sun streamed through the window, painting everyone in gold. Hope's small hand was clasped in her mother's, while Michael's arm rested protectively around Ellie's shoulders. The machines beeped steadily, a rhythm like music, like hope, like love. They had survived the night, and this time the piece wasn't just a story, it was real. The hospital hallway slowly became familiar territory over the weeks that followed Hope's surgery. Michael's polished dress shoes clicked against the gleaming floors each day as he visited, his briefcase tucked under one arm and usually carrying some small gift or treat for the girls. Grace had claimed the comfortable chair by Hope's window as her reading spot, a small stack of children's Bibles and storybooks always within reach. On Michael's third visit, she'd shyly asked if he would listen to her read. His heart melted at the request. This is about Daniel in the lion's den, Grace explained seriously, smoothing the colorful page with careful fingers. It's about having faith even when you're scared. Michael settled into the chair beside her, his tall frame dwarfing the hospital furniture. That sounds perfect. I'd love to hear it. As Grace's clear voice filled the room with ancient tales of courage and divine protection, Michael found himself drawn into the simple power of her faith. He noticed how she would pause occasionally to explain things to Hope, making sure her little sister understood the important parts. Faith, true to her name and nature, had transformed one corner of the room into an art gallery. Her crayon masterpieces covered the wall, bringing splashes of color to the sterile space. She had a special folder labeled "For Michael's Office" in wobbly letters, filled with her most precious creations. This one's you, she declared proudly one afternoon, holding up a stick figure wearing what appeared to be a cape. You're a superhero because you saved Mommy and made Hope's heart better." Michael knelt beside her, examining the picture with genuine appreciation. "That's beautiful, Faith, but you know what? Your Mommy is the real superhero. She's the bravest person I know." Hope's recovery progressed steadily, her natural sweetness winning over every nurse and doctor who entered her room. Her giggles, once weak and breathy, grew stronger each day. She developed a special ritual with Michael, insisting he tell her a story about angels before she would take her medicine. "Tell me about the singing angels again," she would beg, her eyes bright with anticipation. Michael would settle on the edge of her bed, careful of her tubes and monitors. "Well, sometimes when God wants to remind us he's near, he sends angels to sing songs of comfort. They might look like regular people, nurses, doctors, or even little girls who bring joy to everyone they meet." Hope would beam at this, recognizing herself in his words. "Like me?" "Exactly like you," he would answer, his voice thick with emotion. Ellie bloomed in this new environment, her natural compassion finding purpose in the hospital's family wing. She began spending time with other mothers whose children were undergoing treatment, offering the kind of understanding that could only come from someone who had walked a similar path. One morning, Michael found her sitting with a young mother who was crying, her own child in surgery. Ellie held the woman's hand, speaking soft words of encouragement. The scene stirred something deep in his heart, seeing her transform her pain into purpose, her trials into testimony. Pastor Ruth visited regularly, her presence bringing additional comfort and wisdom. One afternoon, she pulled Michael aside, her eyes twinkling. "You've done more than save them, you know," she said quietly. "You've helped restore their sense of worth. That's a holy thing." Michael nodded, watching Ellie help Hope with her physical therapy exercises. "They've saved me too, Pastor. I just didn't know how empty my life was until they filled it." The shelter expansion project moved forward quietly, with Michael ensuring every detail met the highest standards. He wanted it to be perfect, a testament to Ellie's spirit of resilience and grace. The new wing would double the capacity for helping women and children in crisis, though he insisted his name be kept out of the press releases. "This is Ellie's legacy," he told Pastor Ruth firmly. "Let her light shine." As Hope grew stronger, the family began taking short walks in the hospital garden. One particularly beautiful evening, Michael suggested they venture further, to the beach near the hospital. The doctors approved, and soon they were making their way carefully across the sand, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Grace and Faith ran ahead, chasing seabirds and collecting shells, while Hope rode on Michael's shoulders, her small hands resting in his hair. Ellie walked beside them, her face glowing with contentment. When the girls became absorbed in building a sandcastle, Ellie and Michael strolled a few steps away, their hands brushing with each step. The ocean breeze carried the salt spray around them, and distant seagulls called across the waves. "You gave me back my faith," Ellie said softly, looking out at the horizon. "Not just in God, but in goodness, in the possibility of love without fear." Michael stopped walking, turning to face her. The wind played with her hair, and the fading sunlight caught the tears in her eyes. "Ellie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you gave me my life. Before you and the girls, I was just existing, following rules, building walls, trying to prove something to the world. But now," he paused, overwhelmed by emotion, "now I know what it means to truly live." The ocean wind swirled around them like a blessing, carrying the sound of their daughter's laughter. Michael's hand found Ellie's cheek, his touch as gentle as a prayer. She leaned into it, her eyes never leaving his. When their lips met, it was like the first breath after a lifetime of holding back, The kiss was pure and healing, tender with promise, and alive with hope. It held all the words they hadn't said yet, all the dreams they were just beginning to believe in. Behind them, Hope's delighted giggle broke the moment. They turned to see all three girls watching them, Grace's hands clasped together in joy, Faith doing a little dance of excitement, and Hope beaming from her perch on a piece of driftwood. "Mommy's smiling like an angel," Hope declared with 4-year-old wisdom. And she was. They all were. The sun continued its descent into the sea, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. The waves kept their steady rhythm, a soundtrack to this moment of pure grace. Here on this beach, surrounded by the love of 3 little girls and the man who had saved them all, Ellie felt the final pieces of her heart heal into something stronger than before. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was resurrection. As summer faded into autumn, the story of Michael and Ellie's journey continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their coastal town. What had begun as vicious gossip transformed into something beautiful, a testament to love's power to heal and redeem. The media that once hounded them now celebrated their story. Michael's foundation received countless letters from people moved by their example. One morning, as Ellie sorted through the mail with Mrs. Donnelly, she found a note from a teenage girl who had escaped an abusive home after hearing their story on the news. "You see?" Mrs. Donnelly said softly, squeezing Ellie's shoulder. "God uses everything, even pain, for good." Michael's interview with a national news network became a turning point. Sitting in a leather chair, his usual reserve softened by months of loving Ellie and her daughters, he spoke with quiet intensity about his mother's abuse and his own journey from fear to faith. "I spent years building walls," he told the interviewer, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I thought protecting myself meant never letting anyone in. But true healing doesn't come from isolation. It comes from connection, from having the courage to love despite the risk." The segment went viral within hours. Social media exploded with shares and comments, many from survivors sharing their own stories of escape and recovery. Donations poured into Pastor Ruth's shelter network, enabling expansions in 3 neighboring counties. Ellie watched it all with amazement, still adjusting to being seen as an inspiration rather than an object of scorn. Local women's groups began inviting her to speak at their events. At first she declined, terrified of the spotlight. But Pastor Ruth gently encouraged her. "Your story might be someone else's survival guide," the pastor said during one of their weekly coffee meetings. "You don't have to be eloquent, just be honest." So Ellie began speaking, first to small groups at the shelter, then at community centers and church gatherings. Her message remained consistently humble. "I'm just a woman God refused to forget," she would say, her quiet voice carrying surprising strength. "When I had nothing left but prayers and bruises, He sent me angels disguised as people who weren't afraid to help." The girls thrived during this time. Grace joined the church choir, her clear voice soaring with newfound confidence. Faith's artwork covered the mansion's refrigerator, her drawings full of bright colors and smiling faces. Hope, fully recovered from her surgery, danced through the halls singing made-up songs about their family. Michael watched them all bloom with a joy that sometimes overwhelmed him. The empty mansion had become a home filled with laughter, piano music, and impromptu dance parties in the kitchen. Even his business associates noticed the change in him. The way his smile reached his eyes now, how he spoke about his family with quiet pride. One Saturday morning, he asked Pastor Ruth to meet him at the church. She found him standing before the large wooden cross, lost in thought. "I want to do this right," he said without turning around. "Everything about it needs to be perfect." Pastor Ruth smiled knowingly. "The best things in life aren't perfect, Michael. They're real. The next morning, the congregation gathered for regular service. Ellie sat with her daughters in their usual pew, Grace helping Hope follow along in the hymnal, while Faith colored quietly in her children's Bible. None of them noticed Michael's unusual absence from his regular seat. Pastor Ruth's sermon focused on redemption, how God specializes in writing new endings to old stories. As she spoke, Michael slipped into the sanctuary through a side door, followed by Mrs. Donnelly carrying a small velvet box. When Pastor Ruth called Ellie forward for what seemed like a routine announcement about the shelter, Ellie's daughters exchanged knowing glances. They had been keeping this secret for weeks, practicing their parts with Michael late at night after their mother went to bed. Ellie reached the altar steps just as Michael emerged from the shadows. The congregation fell silent as he took her hand, his eyes shining with emotion. Grace, Faith, and Hope scampered up to join them, forming a small semicircle of love around their mother. "Ellie," Michael began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary. "When I first saw you, you were trying to hide your bruises with quiet dignity. I recognized that pain because I'd lived it too. But what amazed me wasn't your suffering. It was your capacity to love through it." He squeezed her trembling hands, continuing softly. "I made a vow years ago never to give myself away. I thought staying alone meant staying safe. But then I found someone worth everything I am." Dropping to one knee, Michael produced the ring, a simple but elegant diamond that caught the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. "Eleanor Hayes, will you marry me? Not for protection or propriety this time, but for love." The girls bounced with excitement as tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks. Through them she nodded, unable to speak through her emotion. "Yes," Faith announced loudly for her mother, causing ripples of tender laughter through the congregation. "She says yes." The church erupted in applause and cheers as Michael slipped the ring onto Ellie's finger. Pastor Ruth stepped forward, raising her hands over the family as they stood beneath the cross, the same cross Ellie had once knelt under in her darkest moments, begging God for deliverance. "Let us pray." Pastor Ruth's voice carried over the gradually quieting congregation. "Lord, we witness today how you make all things new, how you turn mourning into dancing and sorrow into joy. Bless this family you have brought together. Let their love be a testament to your faithfulness." The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everyone in soft colors. Ellie stood encircled by her daughters and the man who had become their protector, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The ring on her finger caught the light, but its sparkle was nothing compared to the joy shining in her eyes. The congregation's amen echoed through the sanctuary like a promise fulfilled. As Michael drew Ellie into a tender kiss, their daughters hugging them tightly, the whole church seemed to glow with the presence of divine love, the kind that transforms scars into stars and broken dreams into beautiful new beginnings. Mrs. Donnelly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, murmuring to Pastor Ruth, "Now that's what I call a miracle." Pastor Ruth smiled, watching the family embrace. "No," she corrected gently. "That's what I call grace." The applause continued, punctuated by sounds of joy and celebration as the family made their way down the aisle together. Michael held Ellie's hand while Hope rode on his shoulders, Grace and Faith skipping ahead, throwing flower petals they had somehow smuggled into church for this moment. The seaside mansion that once echoed with emptiness now breathed with vibrant life. Warm evening light spilled through, tall windows as delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen where fresh bread had just come out of the oven. The sound of Hope practicing Amazing Grace on the piano floated through the halls, her small fingers finding the notes with growing confidence. In the grand dining room, Ellie arranged silverware, while Grace and Faith carefully placed cloth napkins beside each plate. The table settings gleamed in the fading sunlight, transforming their evening meal into something sacred. "Mummy, can I put the flowers in the middle?" Faith asked, reaching for the fresh bouquet of garden roses. "Of course, sweetheart." Ellie smiled, helping her daughter position the vase just right. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Michael entered, carrying long white tapers, his suit jacket draped over one arm after a long day at the foundation. His eyes softened as he watched his family working together, the sight still filling him with quiet wonder. He moved around the table, lighting each candle with careful precision. "Something smells wonderful," he said, breathing in deeply. "We helped make lasagna," Hope announced proudly, abandoning her piano practice to join them. "And garlic bread, too!" As they gathered around the table, the flames dancing gently in the evening air, Hope's small voice piped up. "Can I say grace tonight?" "Of course you can, Angel," Michael said, reaching for Ellie's hand as they all bowed their heads. Hope's clear voice filled the room with childhood innocence. "Thank you, God, for making our family out of love. Thank you for Mommy's cooking and Daddy's hugs and my sisters and our home. And thank you for bringing angels when we needed them most. Amen." "Amen," they echoed softly, the word carrying all their gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. They passed dishes and shared stories about their day. Grace's art project at school, Faith's new friendship with the neighbor's daughter, Hope's improving piano skills. Laughter flowed freely, punctuated by the gentle clink of silverware and requests to pass the salad. After dinner, the girls raced upstairs, their footsteps thundering against the wooden stairs in a way that once would have earned harsh words, but now only brought smiles. "Don't forget to brush your teeth," Ellie called after them, gathering plates as Michael helped clear the table. They worked together in comfortable silence, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters. Through the kitchen window, they could see the moon rising over the ocean, painting a silver path across the dark water. Upstairs, Michael took his turn tucking the girls in, a nightly ritual he cherished. He sat on the edge of each bed, listening to their prayers and kissing their foreheads. Grace quoted her favorite Bible verse about perfect love casting out fear. Faith asked for one more story. Hope just hugged him extra tight, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," in a way that still made his heart catch. When he finished, he found Ellie waiting on the wide front porch, wrapped in a soft cardigan against the evening breeze. She held out her hand, and he took it, drawing her close as they gazed out over the moonlit waves. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Ellie said softly, leaning into his embrace. "You know, you saved us that day. You were the answer to so many prayers." Michael's arms tightened around her, his chin resting on her head. "No, Ellie," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the reason I believe again. You and the girls showed me what real faith looks like, not just surviving, but choosing love even after everything." They stood together in comfortable silence, their silhouettes merging into one shadow against the silvery light dancing on the waves. The sound of the ocean provided a gentle rhythm to their thoughts, its eternal motion a reminder of God's constant presence in their lives. Here, in this moment, they were more than survivors of past pain. They were testimony to healing, to the way broken pieces could be made whole again through grace. Their story had transformed from scandal to sanctuary, proving that love, when guided by faith, could redeem even the deepest wounds. The gentle mercy of grace surrounded them like the evening air, carrying the salty sweetness of the sea and the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. In their silence lay all the words they'd ever needed to say: gratitude, wonder, and the quiet miracle of finding home in each other's hearts. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.